This autumn at Kenilworth Union Church, Katie and Christine and I are preaching this sermon series called What Did Jesus Ask? About 13 of the 307 questions Jesus posed in the four Gospels, including this one from the Gospel according to St. Luke. Do not judge and you won't be judged. Don't condemn and you won't be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put in your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure that is returned to you. Now, how can you see the speck in your neighbor's eye when there's a log in your own? Or how can you say to your neighbor, friend, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself don't see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Know thyself. That inscription is literally carved in granite at the temple to Apollo in Delphi, Greece. For both Jesus and the ancient Greeks, self-knowledge and self-reflection were cardinal virtues. Every worthy human being must accurately and honestly address and assess her own character, both virtue and vice, both beauty and blemish, neither exaggerating nor underestimating either one. And Jesus thought the Pharisees were spectacular failures at self-knowledge. They expected more from other people than they expected from themselves. They set higher standards for other people than they set for themselves. Not to put too fine a point on it, Jesus thought the Pharisees acted a lot like the church lady, constantly scanning the citizenry for vice, error, unholiness, and Satan. To change the analogy, they acted like the Hajib police in Tehran, prowling the streets looking for women who uncover their hair or talk to men. The word hypocrite appears 18 times in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and of those 18 times, 17 of them come from the lips of Jesus himself. He hated hypocrisy. And he uses the word here in that passage I just read, and then he poses one of the 307 questions he asked in the four Gospels. How can you see the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your own? How does that work? Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor knows how important it is to know herself. She says, if God can stay with me in spite of my meanness and my weakness and my stubborn self-righteousness, how dare I hold that against anyone else? Better I should confess my own sins than keep track of yours. But it's so hard to focus on my shortcomings, I'd rather pay attention to yours. America has become so blunt and unkind and cruel recently. It's almost dangerous to venture out into the village streets or go to the grocery store or get on an airplane. Is Kamala Harris really Jezebel? Many, many, many followers of Jesus call her just that. They pay no attention to what he says. Specks and logs. Paying more attention to the log in your own eye than to the speck in your neighbor's eye will make you not just a better parent, child, or friend, it will also make you a better professional. Can you believe that? Thomas Friedman from the New York Times got curious as to why so many smart, accomplished graduates of places like Kellogg School of Management and the Harvard Business School never make it into the top echelons of the business world, and he finally concluded that they are so smart and so disciplined and so hardworking that they never fail. And if you never fail, you never learn. And Mr. Friedman talks about the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error. That is to say, if something goes right at work, it's because I'm a genius, and if something goes wrong, it's because he's an idiot. We want to take credit for everything that goes right and deny blame for everything that doesn't. The fundamental attribution error. Specks and logs, says Jesus. My friend Kirk Morledge was Herb Jordan's roommate at Northwestern University. And when Kirk graduated from Northwestern, he matriculated with me at Princeton Seminary. We both graduated in 1985, and we both took our first churches in Philadelphia. For 5 years, I met Kirk for breakfast every Wednesday morning. I met Kirk and 2 other recent graduates of Princeton Seminary who also took their first churches in Philadelphia, and we met for breakfast every Wednesday in North Philadelphia at one of these old classic chrome-clad diners that are ubiquitous in America. I still spent 40 years, and I still remember the morning when one of us picked up a coffee from the saucer and a cockroach scurried out. So Kirk stayed in Philadelphia for 5 years, and then he became the senior minister at the First Presbyterian Church of Waunakee, Wisconsin. Worked out great for Kirk because he's from Madison. Waunakee is a suburb of Madison, and Kirk stayed there his entire career for over 30 years. By the end of his ministry, Kirk was baptizing the babies of people he baptized when they were babies. Kirk was the Gilboan of Waunakee, Wisconsin. And now Kirk's church is very different from this one. Solidly middle class. It's all teachers and nurses and janitors and salespeople. Very few people at this church work at places like Northern Trust. And Kirk says, when they hired me, I was a single, young, inexperienced, rookie 30-year-old minister, but they took a chance on me. I had no idea what I was doing. They should have fired me 10 times in the last 30 years, but they never did. They are the most gracious group of people I have ever met. I was very moved by this and happy for Kirk, but I chuckled to myself and I said, Kirk, that's not always been my experience with my own congregations. And he said, well, of course not. My people work for your people. This was while I was serving my Wall Street congregation, where all the members were managing directors at Goldman or Lazard. He says, your folk are the evaluators and the criticizers, and my folk are the criticized and the evaluated and the reviewed. They are very much in touch with their own shortcomings because somebody is always eager to remind them. And this makes them kinder. So you know how much I love you. I experience this congregation as at least as gracious as Kirk's in Waunakee. But here's a gentle reminder. If you're a member of the aristocracy, the managerial class, be kind. Remember what Jesus says about specks and logs. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds live in Pound Ridge, New York, which is just over the state line from Greenwich, Connecticut. Ryan was always walking his dog in this beautiful, sprawling park in Westchester County. Now, Ryan Reynolds had a very troubled youth before he grew up. He admits that when he was in his 20s, he was very explosive and was ticked off at all the time about everything. Then one time when he was in his 20s, he had a brawl with a friend that got out of control, so he registered for a seminar in Santa Fe for a week. Ryan does not say if the law encouraged him to attend this anger management workshop. But he goes to Santa Fe for a week, and he says at this seminar, he had a sharing circle. And he makes a face. And he says, I would rather have spent all week punching myself in the face than going to this sharing circle. But it helped a little bit. I realized that I want always to wonder, how can I verbally annihilate this person I'm arguing with? How can I turn them into a puddle? But then I got in touch with this Jungian idea that whatever you think you hate in someone else is probably something you truly hate in yourself. Yes? Do you hear Jesus behind that Jungian idea? Whatever you think you hate in someone else is probably something you hate about yourself. Jesus talked about specks and logs. Now, Ryan Reynolds' entire body is covered with tattoos from his youth. Every time he shoots a movie, he has to spend 3 hours in makeup to cover these old tattoos. And he exposes his left wrist, cut here, it says. He says, I hate every one of these tattoos. And I would get them lasered off tomorrow if it didn't mean hour after hour of brutal pain. But my wife, Blake, says I ought to keep them. I ought to keep a record of the choices I have made. Keep a record of the choices you have made, because not all of them have been perfect. What you think you hate in someone else might be something you hate about yourself. That's the way Carl Jung put it. Jesus talks about specks and logs.